currently Riot has been chasing a lot of sponsorship dollars in order to increase their revenue within specifically the LEC and the LCS leagues, but also within LPL as well too. This kind of hunt for extra dollars has been Riot's main objective coming into 2019. Now, this has been their task for 2019 specifically because the community surprisingly criticized them for not getting into different revenue streams and kind of hunting for money that they should have been hunting for since the very beginning. And this also was noticed when Riot started doing budget cuts for specifically the Worlds of last year. They ended up not sending out everyone to the actual Worlds location as far as the casters, and so they were casting remotely from Los Angeles, and then they would fly out the casters for the actual World Championship finals. But it was quite evident that Riot was kind of penny pinching at that point, and so everyone was pointing towards, well, why is Riot having problems with money now? And it's become pretty apparent that they haven't actually tapped into pretty significant revenue streams in which they could have done a very, very long time ago. And this could have even brought the game to a completely different direction as far as their leagues and how they've developed their own leagues. So now we look into 2019 and we're seeing that they've added a whole ton of sponsorships. I mean, you look at just their global list of sponsorships. They have MasterCard, State Farm, which doesn't really fucking make any sense because State Farm is a very domestic insurance company, at least to my knowledge, only towards North America. Yeah, now maybe they might have another different company which is like a subsection of State Farm, but as far as the name and the branding and everything, it's only within NA, so I don't know why the fuck they would. Anyways, this is a separate topic. If they want to throw away, that money towards a Worlds broadcast or whatever, like, be my guest. If I'm Riot, I would let them do that shit too. Give me free money, right? Then you have Secret Labs, which is the gaming chairs, and then Alienware, and now recently Louis Vuitton. And now, of course, as we know, Louis Vuitton, they decided to do coverage or a sponsorship for Worlds. And so they were going to do like the trophy case and whatnot, but they're also doing designing skins as well too. So they're probably going to get a portion of that revenue as well too, which is kind of unheard of when you consider, I guess, even teams, they weren't willing to give revenue share of skins for the longest time, right? And then we finally got the World Championship skins, of SKT and Samsung and IG and shit like that. So this is kind of a little unheard of to do it to a brand, a sponsor, rather than an actual team as a reward. So that's something new, and it's kind of enlightening, or I guess a positive sign to see from Riot themselves. And of course you have Red Bull as another global sponsor, and then OPPO is an interesting one because that one is, I guess they're a Chinese smartphone manufacturer, and actually they're number 5 in the entire world, and then they're number 3 in China. So they're actually quite a big company. So it's a really good sponsorship for Riot to kind of gather. And we'll go into the whole recent topics of Riot and Chinese partners and things like that because, of course, as we most recently have known, the Hearthstone caster or whatnot got banned for talking about the Hong Kong protests or whatnot. So it becomes a little tricky when you have certain sponsors have like a sort of allegiance maybe to a country, which is a really big thing, or that you just have specific investors that have particular interests and you have to act towards those interests, right? So I want to jump into exactly why sponsorships are so difficult to get, at least within the esports space. And that's because we don't really have any metrics in which these companies are familiar with in order to say, oh, okay, you get this many viewers. Okay, where are you deriving that number from? Okay, Twitch. All right, I guess that's kind of good enough. And YouTube's metrics, okay, that I guess that's kind of good enough. But I really want to know your entire demographic of your entire audience. I want to know the genders of your audiences. I want to know the locations of them. I want to know, exactly how many eyeballs are actually getting onto my sponsorship dollars. Like, how much am I spending for this in order to get this certain amount of viewers or whatnot? And so it's become like this kind of untrustworthy balance between esports companies and the actual sponsorship brands. And so now they've brought in Nielsen, which is a respected analytics company that deals mostly with television, and they get good metrics on exactly how many viewers are viewing a particular show, a particular channel, and then they pass that on to the companies that are looking to sponsor these different channels or whatnot. And so it gives them an accurate representation of how many people are actually going to be seeing their particular ad on that channel or on that show, right? So this is by far probably the biggest partnership that Riot could have ever done within the space, which will help them ultimately secure even more sponsorships in the very near future, because they have a very respected partner that backs up all their viewing numbers and figures. And this becomes even more important when you dive into the Chinese market and trying to sell sponsorships based upon the Chinese market, because we all know that they have some weird system of actually counting viewers not as viewers but as like impressions, or as just this different algorithm which doesn't necessarily mean viewers. They mean quite a different thing. I think it's like ratings or something along those lines. And so now if we go to the different leagues within the entire Riot ecosystem, more specifically the LEC, the LCS, and the LPL. Now, LEC, one of the major things in which I think has revamped their entire brand and their entire business image itself is that the old head coach of Optic Gaming, Romain, ended up becoming the business development manager. So he's taken on the role of deciding which kind of sponsorships they want to bring in and how to actually create a game plan in order to develop the entire, I guess, ecosystem of the LEC. And so Romain, he went from Optic as the general manager, not the head coach. And so now LEC has brought on sponsorships like Kia, a major car manufacturer, which is a perfect sponsorship to go along with the LEC and the audience in which they're targeting, because, well, Kias are pretty fucking cheap. They're a very cheap car, and that's a really good beginner car for people that are 18 or maybe 20 or 22, and they're just looking to buy their first car after they had gotten a hand-me-down from their parents or something. So they're looking to buy their first car, and Kia is a really affordable option for them. So it's a perfect brand in order to, I guess, coalesce into the LEC and that audience, right? Then you have DX Racer, which is another gaming chair. You have Shell, which is a really surprising sponsorship, in that they're just a gigantic oil company. So to have that be funding the LEC is just like, okay, well, that's super old money, and maybe they're still trying to tap into the younger audience. I guess they have to keep on refreshing a loyal branding, and so you gotta kind of get them when they're young anyways. And Then you go into like more common things like Foot Locker, with the shoes and stuff. And then there's a particular brand which is interesting, which is called Chibo. That's TCHIBO. And for a lot of people that probably watch my videos, you're probably from North America, and so Chibo doesn't really ring a bell, but it's actually, I guess it's like a huge German Starbucks chain. Essentially, they serve coffee, and they're traditionally a cafe, but they also sell clothing, they sell houseware, and just other random shit in there just for sale, right? So it's a coffee shop, and where you could just buy other random shit, like other knickknacks and stuff that you may need for the house. So it's really interesting. And they have, I think, over 1,000 stores throughout the entire world. And they're primarily based within Germany. So it's a really, really big chain, and it's a really good sponsorship for them to actually get. And it makes sense for their endemic branding because, it's LEC. They're within Europe, and of course, Berlin, that's where the studio is, so it just kind of naturally lines up. So that's a really good sponsorship for them. And then, of course, you have another strange one, but a big one, which is Warner Music, which provides the music for the LEC broadcast. So they'll be creating some of the soundtracks and things like that. So overall, LEC is actually kicking ass in terms of getting really good sponsors that actually make sense within that entire space. So I think LEC doesn't really have anything to worry about, and I actually think that they should be on track in terms of the sponsorships that they've gotten so far. LCS, not so much. They've gotten Rocket Mortgage and Honda. Now Honda, yeah, sure, that's a very big brand. Of course, we know that from the Team Liquid side, but they've also just become a sponsor for the entire LCS, which is a really great sponsorship, right? Because Honda, it's a little step above Kia, I guess, but not by much, and it's a very affordable brand, and that's what you want to target. You want to target people that are within that, 18 to 25 or 18 to 30-year-old range, to where, yeah, they could afford a Honda eventually, and if they're going to buy a new car, you want them thinking about Honda first, right? Now, LPL, by the way, that's like the end of the list for the LCS. So the LCS is actually lagging behind, I think, in sponsorship, and they actually should try and ramp up here, and hopefully they'll have some more sponsorship deals coming within next year. And I think what also helped the LEC this year was their entire rebranding, and how they rebranded so well and created kind of their own identity for the broadcast. And I think that's brought a lot more viewership up, and especially given that they had changed their days in which they put the broadcast to, which helps a ton as well. So now shifting over to the LPL, Nike, ironically, is sponsoring the LPL, and so that's a really big fucking brand, right? Like, everyone knows Nike. So now the thing about the LPL is we know that they have the biggest viewer base, right? They have the biggest player base too, and so LPL is obviously the cash cow for sponsorships currently. And so when you think about that, it's great, but it will be up to Nielsen to legitimize the actual numbers for sponsorships or sponsors to feel comfortable buying in, right? Because as I said before, they don't actually go on a viewership count, right? They go on a entirely different system, and a system that doesn't necessarily reflect the exact number, and it actually inflates the numbers. That's why so many sites don't trust the Chinese numbers whenever they're put out. So it's a whole different ballgame, and hopefully Nielsen can kind of legitimize those numbers and make sponsors feel comfortable investing within that particular market. Now, as has been repeated pretty much over and over within the whole sponsorship or ad revenue type thing or model within just any type of media whatsoever, or any type of sport or whatnot, is that you need to have an age demographic in which you are targeting. Now, obviously the young age demographic is the biggest draw to sponsors, as it draws in, the magic number of, I believe it's 18 to 49 years of age. It draws in that entire demographic. And obviously ours is much smaller than that. It's 18 or even lower than that. I would say like 16 to like 35. And that's a perfect demographic. That's something that's very hard to reach too, especially as many have reiterated over and over again that ad block is being used a lot. The younger generation doesn't like commercials and such, so it's very hard to reach the younger audience as time continues to grow and there becomes like this hatred for marketing. So esports, as we know, it's mostly made up of men or males, whereas female viewers are actually more valuable from a sponsor perspective, which, as a side note, LA Valiant are clearly marketing towards females more over in the Overwatch League, which might be a small percentage in the Overwatch League itself as far as like their entire demographic. Let's say, maybe like if they get 90% of that 30% of the entire viewer base, which happens to be female, right? 30% females and 70% males, right? I'm just spitballing on how many females actually watch Overwatch. I don't really know, but then that is still quite valuable, as that unique fan base can be leveraged when they negotiate with sponsors. They can say, hey, we have 90% of the female fan base that watch our team, right? And sure, that's only 30% of the total 100% that watch the Overwatch League, but we have 90% of 30%. So we have a huge chunk, of that entire like pie. So their viewer base is even more, I guess, prized when it comes to sponsorship dollars, so they can demand more. And these instances are known within the TV industry because there are certain shows in which draw more females watching those shows. And so say that show might get 300,000 viewers, right? And then another show might get 500,000 viewers. Now, yeah, sure, the 300,000 viewers is lower, but if it's mostly made up of females, and especially in the age of 18 to 49 versus the other one is 70% males or something, and sure, it has 500,000 people, 200,000 more watching, but that viewer base is not as valuable. So there's a big difference in that, and I think that's where esports is lacking currently. But it's still good that Riot is just trying to get these sponsors in, and then maybe they can worry about trying to diversify their viewer base later on and try and make it more valuable. Now, one big concern is that you have to consider that the LCS has dropped sponsors already, right? Or even the LCK dropped sponsors, right? They dropped Coca-Cola. You have LCS that dropped Jersey Mike's, which then became a sponsor for Team Liquid rather quickly. But point being is that LCS has dropped sponsors, and so you have to wonder exactly how good the sponsor retention rate is and how much bang for that sponsor's buck is actually happening behind the scenes. Like, we can't really know those numbers, but it has to be in question when sponsors drop, right? And so I'm not saying that sponsors are dropping like flies within the LCS. This is kind of a relatively new thing, so there isn't necessarily a big track history for this. But with that said, there needs to be a precedent to where we can't drop sponsors continuously, or else then the new sponsors, which we then reach out to, are going to say, well, why did all of these other sponsors drop out? Like, it's obviously not as valuable as they thought it was going to be. So are you guys trying to oversell us? Like, are you lying about your viewership? Like, what's going on over here? So I think essentially the entire piece to this puzzle is that that Nielsen Analytics company is largely going to legitimize our industry, and I think we'll see a lot of growth within the sponsorships that Riot can get, and then through that, hopefully, more teams can be more sustainable. And then therefore, of course, that'll trickle down over into the players, and maybe they can get a little higher salary too. But as of right now, it's just teams aren't getting as much revenue as they should be getting, as these evaluations are coming in for, tens or hundreds of millions of dollars for these esports organizations, and yet they aren't getting the sponsorship money that was kind of initially somewhat promised when franchising started. Is that, well, you guys should be making more money now. Let's try and create these revenue streams in order for you to make money. So I like where ultimately the direction is headed for Riot. I like that they're trying, and I like the grind in which they're just trying to get more and more money. And you can see that they're being more money conscientious with these budget cuts for the trips for their support staff for events and everything, or even their casters or whatnot. So it's ultimately good, but it's just hoping that Riot can keep pace and can keep adding more significant sponsors as time goes on. So I think that's really interesting, and we should definitely at least keep in mind this space and actually maybe revisit it later on to see exactly how Riot is doing in that sector.